the recording. Okay. So today's webinar is about issue identification, problematizing, and research question framing. And the learning outcome generally should be to develop an understanding about the potential conflict between outcome expectations, the research problem, and the research question. And more specifically, we will look into what constitutes a research problem, how to identify and articulate problems, how to frame them, practice how to problematize and articulate, derive corresponding research questions, and to learn about guides and guidance and the trickiness in there. Now, why is this topic of relevance? Well, it's at the core of what you are expected to learn as part of your doctorate. You are expected to learn how to identify issues, to problematize them, and to derive corresponding research questions, and also to understand how those three relate to each other and how they perhaps conflict with each other. It's not uncommon that the outcome expectation is what you're really interested in, but that is not matching to what the actual problem is. So, and this is very tricky because it could and often happens that it leads to the research not being able to progress, because if it's not matching in between what the actual problem is and what you want to look at, then you always will try to revert to what you want to look at, and that is not where the problem is. And therefore, the questions that you are asking are not really relevant to what you should be doing. So this is something we will be looking into a bit further. And with this, so what constitutes a research problem in the first instance? And this is where actually it stops for many students for many months, that they do not understand what is a problem. And I found this very well written article from Ronald Jacobs. It's not too long and it's really available via ResearchGate. So we will go through some of the things that are put forward there. Regardless of the nature of the doctorate program, the one constant for all dissertations and for all research for that matter is a need to state the problem of the study based on scholarly literature. Doctorate programs commonly require that students take a sequence of research courses that usually focus on how to carry out a study. That is the design, the methodology, and the data analysis technique, whether they be quantitative or qualitative in nature. Unfortunately, what is often omitted from most research sequences is an understanding of what constitutes a problem in the first place and how to articulate it. And this very much is the case, or at least I can say, based upon experience with more than 500 doctoral students, going through any type of preparatory courses is very easy. Learning about theory is very easy. Applying a technique is very easy. The real issue is exactly to understand what is an issue. And it takes, as said, very long until many students do learn that. So be aware of that. And if you think that might be the case, train it and make sure that you understand what is a problem. Now, another thing is the problem of study based on the scholarly literature. Now, if you don't know what is a problem, it's very difficult to find relevant literature because you don't know what is relevant to what. So this is another thing. It's quite often that you are asked to write a literature review at the beginning of your study. However, which type of literature are you going to select of relevance to what? Relevance to the expected outcome or relevance to the problem? Now, the expected outcome you do know. So this is one of the ways where research already can go wrong, by you selecting just the literature that focuses on the outcome expectations, but not the one focusing on the problem. And on top of that, there might be a difference in between the problem as such and the research problem. So this is the next thing that you need to understand, that there's a difference between a problem as such, like, for example, I don't have money, I'm bankrupt. This certainly is a problem to me. However, it's not a research problem because the economic system is made for this to happen, and bankruptcy is something that is foreseen. So there's a difference in between a problem as such and a research problem. And then another challenge is you need to articulate the problem in a very tiny matter. Now, if you can articulate the problem in a one-sentence statement, that shows that you very well are aware about what the issue is. If you need still 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages, that means you're still exploring on what the real issue is, and therefore naturally you need more words. So the question is, how well is your research problem framed? And this then also will show you where you are in your research. So it's not that uncommon that at the beginning, or it's the other way around, it's quite common at the beginning that you need more words to articulate what is the issue, and that it's perhaps more focusing on the outcome expectations. And that's natural and normal. It's just part of the development stage. Now, all of that is very well explained in this article. Another thing is, let's look into this. How well is your research problem framed? If you use the word you, I, me, they, your focus will go away from the research problem towards the context in which the research is taking place, which is of course important. However, if you see here how many words you can save by just keeping it focused on the research problem, that's a large amount of words. And it's not only the amount of words that can be saved, but it's also making your research much more focused. So understand, if you use context information like I, me, you, they, that's fine, but it will inflate the number of words and it will remove the focus from the problem. And that's also something where you can control you much better if you focus on the problem only. Now, as just said, that you start with more words, it's natural. And as this paper also acknowledges, constructing problem statements is usually a formative process. That is, the first drafts rarely are acceptable, but they serve an important function. Now, if you go back and look into your first writings, you might see, oh yeah, that looked a bit amateurish, but that's a normal development. So understand that it's part of the way that research works. And we, at the beginning of the webinar, had a discussion on how to express and explain a problem statement. Now, at the end of the research, it's quite clear to you what the research problem is. However, once you write up your thesis, you can't start with that endpoint in the introduction, because then you won't be able to show progress and how you have worked and identified the problem and examined it. So it's an iterative process, and it's not to be forgotten. Means the early writings still serve a purpose. They still can set the scene in the introduction chapter, and they still can guide you on where you actually started some years ago. And this is important because this research project can take 3 to 8 years. So after that long time, you certainly don't know by heart any longer where did you start? What was your starting point? So keeping early notes can help you to understand, where did I come from? Now, there are common issues in accordance to Jacobs where statements tend to fall in. Now, they fail to establish the existence of the problem. We talked about that. Explain every problem in the same way. Too generic, neglect to show any history to the problem. No literature, lacks support to show how the interacting proposition is related. And now, while this paper is very good, it also is very dangerous. And we come in the last part to the dangerous parts of guides and tips and understanding them. Now, in the appendix, there are a number of examples put forward about what are called to be good research problem statements. Now, let's look into the first example. The interactive proposition is, although numerous studies are available that describe structured on-the-job training practices and impacts within one organizational situation, fewer studies are available that describe structured OJT practices and impacts across organizations and business sectors within a single national setting. If structured, OJT has been shown to achieve results of value to organizations. So now that's again our outcome expectation. So OJT is seen to be something great. Outcome expectation. If this training approach is being considered as part of broader national workforce development effort, again, something that we consider on doing, outcome expectation, but little is known about how it is being used in this way, then more must be known about the nature and impacts of structured OJT. So there's an arguing for more literature, more studies are required, so to understand if OJT is something good. Now, let's see, fails to establish the existence of the problem. Now, this example put forward is a good example. As a matter of fact, is not a good example, but a very bad example, because it fails to establish the existence of a problem. It just argues over outcome expectation and therefore argues more studies are needed. But why? The first question should be, why are there fewer studies available? Is it perhaps not more are needed? Is it perhaps it's an area that is not interesting to any researcher? Now, if there are little studies available, also could mean you're just not looking well enough, or you just don't know what are related studies. So there are a number of things that could be the reason for fewer studies are available. So that shouldn't be the starting point for arguing this study is needed, because it's not matching to the requirement of establishing the existence of the problem in the first instance. And the other examples in the appendix, if you like to take a look at it, are not better. None of them actually, as a matter of fact, shows the existence of a problem. Now, the paper is very well written. However, the appendix is very misleading. So are there any questions to the first part? Everyone still with me? Okay, so how to identify and articulate workplace-based issues. Let's look into this. Let's start with what is an issue. Now, it's something problematic, not supposed to be like it is, something broken, a pain, dark. So anything that's shiny, beautiful is likely not a problem. So we need to understand that for the first. And as long as it's painful and you sense you would want to go away, that's a good sign, because then you look at something that's really problematic. Now, let's look into this example. And I know a number of students that exactly work in this area. And AI experts say automation could replace 40% of jobs in 15 years. Now, is that an issue? It might be problematic. Again, as an example earlier, if I'm having no money, I might be bankrupt. That's problematic for me, but it's not a problem as such. It's progress. So there's nothing problematic into this situation, so you can't research it against that background. Let's look further. Issues are real and not fictive. Last year, a strange self-driving car was released onto the quiet roads of Mountain County. It was unlike anything demonstrated at Google. And the car didn't follow a single instruction provided by an engineer or programmer. Instead, it relied entirely on algorithms. Now, that might be problematic, but at this point in time, it's not. It's again, only progress, and there's nothing wrong at that. So it might be scary, obviously. Now, once it comes, however, to a car crashing because of the algorithm or the sensors gone wrong, then we have a real situation at hand. It's certainly not meant to happen. But do we need to wait for that crash to happen? No, surely not. We can anticipate what might go wrong, because it won't be the first time that software is defective, that sensors are not working, that different priorities are given once programming. So all of those things can be anticipated, and that can be researched. And then it can be prioritized. We can see what happened in the past, how many sensors got broke, what then is going to happen. So there will be a lot of cause and effect relationships that we can be looking at, and we can map things over. So it can be done in a very structured way. And most often, once you deal with foresight studies, what you do is you look back. You just need to learn what is the things you can relate it to and to look back. Now, let's look at another example. Issues might be blurred and complex. Everybody is talking about the Internet of Things, a buzzword supposed to magically solve all challenges inherent in digital transformation. With such projections, company leaders feel the urge to invest in IoT, but are often held back by a lack of accurate and credible calculations for the expected return on potential initiatives. According to our HBR poll survey, 80 to 90% of respondents can't accurately measure ROIs for their initiatives. Not to lose traction against their competitors, some companies even start initiatives or projects without a proper business case at hand. Unsurprisingly, failure rates of digital transformation initiatives lie in the range of 60 to 85%. The good news is that most of the elite group that do measure returns are seeing relatively quick paybacks. Now, this is a situation that we will come in the one form or the other, often across, in particular, if we are working in a business world. And we also will see a lot of urge on acting in such a situation. Now, the question is there anything from a research perspective that we could be looking in, what are potential research problems, challenges inherent in digital transformation. It's not an issue, but a challenge, as the word quite rightly says. Lack of accurate and credible calculations, not an issue as such. The question is, why is there a lack? Which then might be a research problem. Start initiatives or projects without proper business case at the end. I think it's not an issue, but a question about informed decisions or taking decisions not informed. Failure rates of digital transformation initiatives, that's not an issue, but a conclusion based on evidence. 60 to 85% shows there is quite some evidence behind. So there's quite some literature, and that would allow us to see if there are real issues or not in our organization. So broken down into different component parts, a very complex situation becomes very simple, and we can see and understand what might be areas that qualify for research and what might not, and where problems could reside. Now, in the next two parts, we will look into literature then that can help us to frame problems. One very useful book that I can recommend and which is available for free and the web, it's Engaging with Carol Becci on strategies, interaction, and exchanges, and what she called What's the Problem Represented to Be Approach. While it's used in a policy context, I think it's applicable across a number of domains and situations, and it allows you to logically derive research questions. Now, here, for example, it shows us that, again, outcome expectations and research question and research problem are very different things. And in this situation, where training is supposed to be an issue and should be improved, the real question is perhaps not how to improve the training, but what's causing such lack of training in the first instance. Again, outcome expectation, research problem, different opposite ends, and it is important to understand that. Another thing, and we actually run a webinar dedicated to that, is the problem, its partner, the solution. Now, it's not uncommon, or the other way around, it's very common actually, to what I can see from my experience, that students focus the first 2 minutes on the problem and then go and spend the next 2 years working towards the solution. Because it's much more exciting, obviously, than looking into the dark side and what's hurting. Now, if you want to understand the difference in between the one and the other, please take a look at this part of the book from page 23 onward. And it will help you to understand the opposite ends and how to navigate across them. And apparently, this seems to be in particular within Western settings, where we are working very much focused in a day-to-day work environment on solving problems rather than spending minutes on thinking about what the actual problem is. So this might also be something that needs to be distinguished if you're from other parts of the world. I don't know how much this is applicable to your situation, so please, that need to be evaluated against the cultural background. Let's move into the next part. How to problematize and articulate research problems. Now, while it's very difficult, it's not something that's very new. And there's very good help support out, century old, but still applicable. One of those is the ABT approach, and but therefore, which can help you to articulate research problems, and which is very much different than the AAA and. Frequently is literature review at the beginning, where you just go through the literature to accommodate, to gather knowledge for yourself, to understand an area better. Once you do have that knowledge, you start to contrast, and with contrasting views, ABT comes in, and but therefore. So if you do that in a structured manner, it helps you to advance and allows you to hit the main points about the research, but introduces a conflict. Therefore, is a synthesizes dealing how the research will address and potentially resolve the situation. Now, the point here is ABT is obvious in hindsight, means after you have done your research, but very blurry at the start of the research, where you might start rather over the end approach. Now, let's take this example, which comes from a scientist with 10 plus years of experience who was writing a funding proposal. And you can see that in that funding proposal, the but is entirely missing. He starts with the end, shows what he wants to do, and then directly jumps in with a solution. And therefore we do that. But why? Why has it no one done before? What is this exact issue here? What is a but? If you don't show that, so why bother, right? You are not getting through that message. Let's take this example, which shows the and but therefore in practice. The sea web coral may serve as a central habitat for many commercially valuable species in the mid-Atlantic, and there has been evidence of damage and overgrowth by fooling organisms of sea webs and fish areas. But little is known about the local reefs, nor the individual sea webs that comprise them, despite their potential importance to commercial fisheries. Therefore, we are examining the age, colony complexity, growth, and regrowth after damage of sea webs from 4 sites in the Delmarva region in an effort to reconcile this knowledge gap. Okay, the and but therefore is all there. However, it's still unclear why no one has done this before. Why bother? Why no one bothered? This part of the information is crucial and it is missing. This is to say, and but therefore can provide you with some structure and guidance. However, there are still other things to be taken into the account, like the why bother. Now, let's look into another example. Problem statement: the organization is showing a high fluctuation rate as the leadership team is lacking people management skills. Now, it shows there's a broken situation, it has a cause and effect relationship that's flagged up, and there is some initial observation which is providing evidence. Now, while the problem seems to be clear, the reason why the leadership team is lacking people management skills is still very much unknown. And this is what the research will aim to find out. So you see, it provides a good introductory sentence into the research. It's very precise. It justifies why the research is carried out, why it's necessary. A high fluctuation rate certainly is not good. And the reason for that is based upon observation, lacking people management skills, and this is the entry road into your research. Now we come to the final part on how to derive research questions and ensure these are actionable, which are 2 different things. The one thing is you need to derive a research question from the problem, and the other is a research question should also be actionable. Now, those knowing Adam Douglas' Hitchhiker Guide Through the Galaxy will know that when the question's gone wrong, the answer is 42. Now, what is a good research question? First of all, it should be focused, specific, complex, analytical, and unbiased. Now, the last part is a tricky thing, going back to the outcome expectation. We will always have a bias, and that should be acknowledged, and you should try to understand what is your bias and how to deal with that. So why is it so hard to craft research question? Now, again, the relationship between problem, research question, and outcome expectation is one of the clear reasons why. And another is you should derive the question from the problem, but if the problem is not clear, so will be, let me just mute everyone. All right. So will be the research question. And that is also not uncommon. And we have a webinar that's dedicated on that. So if you want to learn how to frame research question, be welcome to take a look at that. The question will evolve with you over your research. It will become more and more clear as the research develops. So that's something normal. Again, as said, if you keep the notes from where you started, that will help you to understand later how your research question evolved with your research together. Let's look at this example on how research can go very different ways down depending on how you frame your research question. If you have as a starting point, according to the university mission statement, the university seeks to provide students with a safe, healthy learning environment. Dormitories are one important aspect of that learning environment. Now, however, students living in dorms currently do not have air conditioning units, and during the hot season, it's common for room temperatures to exceed 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this certainly is not a desirable situation. Now, we can go 2 ways down, a solution-focused research question, which asks, how can we make the dorms more hospitable, which is focusing on the outcome expectation, or the problem-focused research question, why is there no air conditioning in the first place? And as we will see, the research outcome will be very different. In the solution situation, we might end up concluding, we hope to have found a solution, but might end up understanding that monetary reasons have not been a real issue, therefore we need to go back to the drawing board, or suggest that to be for future research. Now, if you would have went down the problem-based way, then you will have looked into all of the reasons why there haven't been air cons in the first case, and then you might find out that money or other reasons will be the underlying root to the problem. Now, what is an actionable research question? As the most simple definition, something that allows you to act upon it. And what does it mean? You might have something that you want to explore. So what, who, what, where, how, and why are good questions that will lead to actionable research. And it should be clearly focused on the problem. Now, having actionable questions is not only a benefit for your thesis research, but also in your day-to-day business environment. Let's take a look at this example. Much of an executive's workday is spent asking others for information, requesting status updates from a team leader, for example, or questioning a counterpart in a tense negotiation. Yet, unlike professionals, such litigators, journalists, and doctors who are taught how to ask questions as an essential part of their training, few executives think of questioning as a skill that can be owned, or consider how their own answers to questions could make conversations more productive. That's a missed opportunity. Questioning is a uniquely powerful tool for unlocking value in organizations. It spurs learning and the exchange of ideas. It fuels innovation and performance improvement. It builds rapport and trust among team members, and it can mitigate business risk by uncovering unforeseen pitfalls and hazards. Therefore, you might want to think about questioning not only something from a scientific perspective of being of relevance, but also from a business perspective, and how that is dealt with in your workplace, and what that perhaps implies to your work culture, and whether or not it's going the right way down. Now, let's look into a concrete example from IBM on how questioning could or could not have worked out. During the 60s, Big Blue had the opportunity to buy or license Xerox's new reprographic photo process. Sync copies. IBM hired a consulting firm to answer the following question. If a more reliable, cheaper, and faster processing firm were available, how many more copies from the originals would people make in a given year? However important that inquiry may have been, IBM asked the wrong question by miles. According to Showmaker and Krupp's article, IBM ignored a new segment of the market that turned out to be many times larger, namely copies of copies of copies. This was a huge overlooked opportunity. What if IBM had asked instead, how might the new Xerox process change when and how people make copies, and what might this grow to in total number of copies made in future years? So you see, asking the right or the wrong question makes a difference. So then, is it the question or is it the answer? We already talked about that as your research progresses, so is your understanding about the problem, and so will the question change. It will become more precise over the time. And once the data is collected and the findings start to emerge, one often sees something strange happening. There's no clear fit in between initial questions and potential answers at hand. And this is something very common. And then it will require a re-engineering of your research work, because obviously the research question that is initially put forward in the introductory chapter must fit to what the work is answering. So there will be a constant change through the thesis as your research emerges. So you are never done with a chapter, but you always will need to adapt the chapters so to understand how are they relating to each other. And you can do that actually at a very high level. And we also were running a webinar on that by using mirroring approaches. So you work over the table of content, which would require you, however, to have specific names rather than generic names. Like in this example, you know exactly from the table of content what stands in each chapter, and hitting this level of preciseness allows you to just take a look at the table of contents, and this provides you with a holistic view of the research. Now, if you manage to reach that level of preciseness and hand in your thesis, the likelihood that you will go out of survival with only minor change requests is very high, because the examiners will be very much confident already by just opening your thesis, because they understand that you understand your work and that you have thought it through and structured it in a very clear manner. And this simple example of mirroring allows you on how to do that. Again, that's nothing that we developed or that's new. It actually comes from the music and from the opera field, and it's century old. So there's a lot of research about that, how to mirror out your work. Again, be welcome to look into that webinar to understand how to use mirroring to build up your thesis. Now, as said, in the closing, we want to come and look into guides and guidance and how good and dangerous those might be. We already saw in the beginning the paper from Jacobs, which was excellently written. However, the examples in the appendix were very dangerous for those that are new to research, because you would assume those are good examples for research problems, while in fact they were not. Now, the same goes for many guides. They are written by very experienced scientists often, and they do know what they talk about. However, they know what they talk about, you likely do not. And therefore, you will read the same piece of paper with very different focus and eyes and understanding, and this can misguide you. So at the beginning, what's advisable is to discuss any articles that you're reading within your cohort with your peers, and to try to tease out how things are meant and what really the understanding, the common understanding is, and where false friends might reside. And I think it's really that many guides suggest that you consider things that you simply do not know at the beginning. As said, the initial literature review chapter, for example, is mainly for you, but not for the thesis. The initial literature consultation is an which allows you to build up knowledge and understanding of your research area and field, which is a normal development. Once this is there, you will move from end to end, but therefore being able to understand where there are conflicting messages within the literature, where studies have different findings and why they are there, and to compare across them. So let's look about some of those false friends, tips that you read about and what they do not mean. Researchers should begin by identifying a broader subject of interest that lends itself to the investigation. Now, this actually does not mean to start broad. It just means start with a broad mind, but still from a specific issue that you're looking at. But then instead of just saying, okay, outcome expectation is that, therefore I'm going that way around. No, keep it broad, look at the different problem domains that could exist. What are those? Map them out, write them up, and then this is the type of broadness that is meant. Now, contrary to that, begin to narrow the topic by asking open-ended how and why question. For example, a researcher may want to consider the factors that contribute to childhood obesity and the success rate of intervention programs. Now, understand the guidance is not suggesting that you focus on the success rate of intervention programs. What the guidance suggests instead is that you focus on the factors that are contributing to. Now, again, it will depend very much with the lens you're reading that sentence on what the subsequent actions are. In this case, it's the factors and not the expected outcome expectation. Now, if you want to learn more about today's subject, we do have, as a matter of fact, online course about issue identification, problematizing, and research question framing. It comes in 3 support formats, and the first is it's freely available for self-study. So be welcome to check it out. It consists of 8 tasks, which correspond roughly to each task being 1 week of work. Our courses are attempted to be very practical so that the learning of the course can be directly leveraged into the thesis, and therefore it's not a loss of 8 weeks, but rather a complementary to your research work. Now with this, I like to hand over to Jack. Those that do not want to participate in the group activity